to expand your awareness and cultural proficiency in the areas of racial justice and intersectionality? The ANTE UP Professional Development Initiative invites you to Black Sweat, a 40-session professional development series facilitated entirely by Black sexuality educators, counselors, therapists, and other practitioners. Black Sweat is inspired by the song from the late great Prince and invites participants to witness the best in both emergent and seasoned Black thought leadership. In fact, this Sunday, May 30th, you can join me at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for my workshop on how to assist clients and students in moving through race as a barrier to sexual empowerment. Each session is 1 hour long and offers 1 ASEC certified credit. Tickets for Black Sweat range between $25 and $50 per session and can be purchased at www.anteuppd.com/black-sweat. For more information, hit that link or feel free to email the show at mailbox@tsobpodcast.com. Now, let's get on with the show. Welcome to T.S.O.B. with Dr. G, a podcast featuring intellectual table talk about race and sexuality. I'm your host, Dr. Tracy Q. Gilbert, a sexuality educator, writer, and researcher. Join me as I talk with the most brilliant minds in human sexuality, applying a professional Black lens to discussions about sexiness, health, and healing in the new millennium. It's T.S.O.B., the sex ed of Black folk. Let's get to the get down, shall we? Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of TSOB with me, Dr. G. I am so excited. Y'all already know I'm so excited to be here with you with another episode. We have an amazing guest. But of course, I always have amazing guests, but this person is no exception. This is not only my colleague in this work, but my friend, my sibling. I have so many things to say about them, and I'm going to give them their flowers in just a minute, but I'm going to go ahead first off and read their bio. So I'm talking about no one else but Bianca Laureano. So, and I know a lot of y'all already know who Bianca is, so go ahead and recognize and get ready to pay your homage as well. Bianca Laureano is an award-winning educator, curriculum writer, and sexologist. She is a foundress of the Women of Color Sexual Health Network, the LatiNegrxs Project, and hosts Latinosexuality.com. She has written several curricula that focus on communities of color, including What's the Real Deal About Love and Solidarity and the Communication MixTape, Speak on It, Volume 1. She also wrote the Sexual and Reproductive Justice Discussion Guide for the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, published in 2018. Bianca has been on the board of CLAGS, the LGBTQ Center at CUNY, the Black Girl Project, and SisterSong Women of Color Reproductive Justice Collective. Bianca is now took her talents on her own and started ANTE UP, which is a professional development consortium that features workshops, all types of amazing things for people who claim to be serious and want to invest their resources in getting better at teaching through a social justice lens. But on top of that, Bianca has also elevated her platform to talk more about disability justice. And so one of the main things she's done recently has been the lead educator for the Netflix film Crip Camp, and led efforts to create a curriculum rooted in disability justice practice, self-determination, and social emotional learning competencies that are aligned to the Common Core state standards. If all of that wasn't dope as hell, she also in 2020 really got her flowers and earned an honorary PhD for her work in justice, equity, and inclusion in the U.S. sexuality field. And so now y'all know, well, you should already knew, but now you really know why I have her on the show. And so with that, I just want to say thank you for being here, Bianca, and welcome to TSOB.
Thank you, Tracy. You know, I love you, and people don't know, but like Tracy drove me to New Orleans when I needed another place to grieve after my mama's death. So, Tracy hauled all my stuff.
That was an adventure. I loved it.
Yes.
I loved it. And you know what? Blame my mama for being a road tripper when I was younger. I love driving. But while you are talking about me, I just want to take the time and just really thank you. I don't even remember when I first met you or came across you or whatever, but I will say the one thing I knew from out the gate was like, Bianca Laureano was no one to fuck with, like no one to play with. And that for me was so important. And I'm going to get I'm not going to cry, but I do want to get a little sensitive and personal because I've always been one of those people who, as a dark-skinned, fat, black femme, there was always, growing up in the Midwest as well, there was always this self-censoring that I had to do to kind of make it through the world, right? This understanding of, you're automatically perceived as too much. You're automatically perceived as too loud. You're automatically perceived as too aggressive. And so in many ways, I had really learned how to mute myself and bring myself down, to not be too offensive to people, to maybe get in spaces and have a little bit of things. So when I first came across you, the one thing I was just, first off, I was like, oh shit, I'm not ready. Like, woo, wow, Bianca's a lot. But as I got to know you, I was just so grateful because you were my possibility model of who I could be. Like really recognizing that I had justifiable anger, I had justifiable emotions, and I had every right to be as loud and vocal and to speak up and to call things. And so I just want to give you your flowers for that, because you've been, like, I don't have many mentors in this field, but I definitely consider you one of my mentors, and for that, and just for you and maybe a couple of other folks are just folks where I'm like, this is a person I can go to if I need help thinking through something, who can offer me new ideas. And so I just want to go on record as saying that I love you and appreciate you for that, because you're also one of the realest folks. Like, I can count on you to keep it 100 with me at all times, and I can't say that for everybody else in this field. There are others, but I can't say that for everyone in this field. So I just want to honor you for that. Definitely.
Thank you. And I love you, and I receive that love and reflected back to you, because I definitely, it's a reciprocal relationship that I definitely have with you, Tracy. And I too can't remember when our paths crossed, but I know it was a transformative moment for both of us. And one of the things I also love about our relationship is how we both we value accountability.
Yes.
We value this was wrong, this was hurtful, or like, can we reflect on this a little bit more? Or can we take this out or be clear? Like, we really come at each other from a space of understanding and not wanting to be right. And that to me is an important part of a friendship, and also a collaboration, and the communities that I want to be a part of. And it's been hard. It was really hard. And also, it was through our friendship that I became more fully present in doing this work in a more radical way, where I was able to be like, okay, I got to unlearn all the white supremacist bullshit that I've been told and socialized to believe, and all those lies. And also, for many light-skinned people, it takes us a minute, sometimes longer, to really get to a place where we're like, I can use this in service to Black liberation. And be strategic about it. And that definitely has always been something that I've admired of you, pushing me and challenging me and asking me to do things differently, because there is a power that comes with being lighter skinned, even though, yes, I am fat, I am tall, I'm, all these other things, but I also have all these other things that people want in our field, that people value. And how can I use that strategically to create change? And that's really been at the heart of a lot of the work that I want to do for us. And I'm also ready to pass the torch.
And we're going to get into that. We're going to get into all that in just a minute. Before we really get into our conversation, though, I have to ask you the question I ask all my guests, my starter question. So, where are you from? Where are your people from? And what's got you thinking about sexuality these days?
Yeah, so I grew up in Maryland, and at the time it was considered Silver Spring. And if you're from that area, that's not what it was. That's not what it is today. It's called something different. It's called Glenmont. But very suburban. My parents migrated from Puerto Rico to Washington, D.C. For my father to get a full grant to for a Master's of Fine Arts program at American University. And that was, when the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was being required to be implemented at universities. And a lot of universities went to Puerto Rico because they were like, oh, they're not white like us. They're different enough. It'll meet the quota. And so a lot of Puerto Ricans were recruited from the island to the U.S. To go to college to meet those quotas of inclusion or diversity. So everybody else was back on the island. And so we grew up, like 9 months out of the year in the United States. And then, like many parents of color, they sent us down south back to Puerto Rico for the summer. And so we were able to be with family members until I was about 16, at which point they were like, get your own plane ticket if you want to keep coming to Puerto Rico. So that's where I'm from. I'm currently living in Oakland, California. And I never imagined living in California before. And I met my partner. And I know, right? I was one of those like late bloomers when it comes to love. I mean, I definitely have felt love for partners, but it wasn't until, my mom died and I was just reeling into a spiral and also really honest about what I needed and what I didn't need. And, and I really fully believe that my ancestors came together and were like, this person is ready for you and can show up for you. And so this is like it's like that grown-up love that James Baldwin talks about. Like it's that war, it's that battle, it's the growing up. So when I met G and G grew up here in the Bay Area, I was like, where else am I going to go? My entire matrilineal line is not in Puerto Rico anymore since the hurricanes. And I was like, I don't really have a home necessarily. It's wherever I'm going to make it. So I'm currently in West Oakland, California. This is my 3rd year here. I spent 2 years in New Orleans when you drove me down from spending 17 years in New York City. So I've been a lot on the East Coast. Yeah. And then what got me into sex, a lot of things. I mean, I grew up, I was born in 78 and
Zennials in the house.
I know, right? Millennials. I think I'm still a millennial. I don't know what I am. I forget what they call us, but I'm on that cusp.
Yep, that's why I said the Zennials. That's that cusp part. Yeah.
My parents were big hippies, and so I grew up with books like The Joy of Sex, Our Bodies, Ourselves, around just for me to like look through, and we had that access to information, but also we didn't have the talk though with information from my parents. So my parents were also just didn't have the kind of education that they could transmit to me and my sister. And so I grew up at a time where terms like machismo were really popular, where people were assuming all Latinos were Mexican, where people were assuming that like Latino was this new racial category, which just is not true. And I too had a very different upbringing in my family, where my family knew I was too Black and they tried to make me less Black by pulling me out of the sun and straightening my hair, cutting it all off, and giving me messages about how I look dirty and things like this throughout my lifetime, all because they were like, we don't want a Black person in the family. And it's like, well, you already have several if I'm what pops out, and I don't look like anybody else. So a lot of that, like anti-Blackness, a lot of the xenophobia that showed up when I was growing up in the 90s, and a lot of like the racial ambiguity that was a part of 90s hip hop, where all the light-skinned girls with hair like mine were the love interest in all the music videos. So it was a really weird experience for me, where I had power in my body and didn't understand it, misused it, and I'm still trying to figure out like what's the best way forward with that power that I still have, and how to take care of 16-year-old Bianca that didn't know what to do there. So it's a lot of, I think, healing work as well, but also it was always present. It was ever present and just never discussed. And so I felt it through and through, but I just didn't have the language or the access in many ways that young people have today. So it's kept me field.
And I love that you bring up this story, because one of the things that was initially just part of why I was like, I need to learn more about you, was because you were always really big on bringing the Afro Latina, like the Afro Latinx identity to the fore, which for me was just new because of the, growing up where I grew up, there was so much segregation that very little interactions happened between Black folks and Latinx folks that wasn't related to violence or pitting us against each other and a bunch of other bull. And so, not to make you go into any lectures or anything, but for the folks, especially the Black folks who are like, tell me more. Can you share a little bit more kind of what race looks like in Latin American countries, kind of, and some of the dynamics that go on and in terms of those differences between white Latinx folks and Black Latinx folks, etc.
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. It looks a lot like white supremacy, just in Spanish. Or Portuguese, right? There's this really beautiful archive called slaveryvoyages.org that offers a time lapse of how kidnapped Africans were removed from their homelands and brought over to the West. And when people watch that, one of the main things that I have people do is notice where those ports are, where they stop. It's primarily in the Caribbean and in South America. And so this is why we have Brazil being, the place where we have the most Black people in the Western Hemisphere because of all of the chattel slavery that occurred. And, when people start to see, there was just a couple of boats that stopped in the U.S. in comparison to all these other ones, here's where we start to understand that the kidnapping, the forced enslavement, the rape of our ancestors happened throughout this continent. Right. And, people are trying to erase that because it makes them comfortable. It brings them closer to white supremacy. And a lot of us don't have that privilege. I believe my parents had the privilege of having their parents try to wean out that Blackness from the line. But then I popped out, right? So here is another conversation around how our genetics don't give a fuck. Right. Like, let's just,
genetics do not care about your politics at all.
No, they're like, we're here. What's happening? And so I think, I find a lot of compassion for my parents at times, and at times I don't, because they weren't prepared to raise a child, let alone a child that didn't look like them, whose body was different from theirs, who was challenging a lot of what they were trying to figure out along the way. So for me, I'm in a really interesting position where my parents don't identify as Black. They, when people see pictures of them, they're like, oh yeah, they look like a young.
They look like Negroes to me.
Right. But they had never claimed that identity, and they still don't. And so I was literally and figuratively the Black sheep in my family, which is not saying a lot because I'm very light. But also it was, or it remains, a space where I think a lot more work is being done. So when I started like the LatiNegrxs Project, it was hard. Like, we only saw like one or two people of color in the media, let alone Black Latinos.
Right.
And so today there's a lot more nuance with people talking about Afro Latino or Black Latino and what those two terms mean and how they're different. So my understanding today by the young people who are guiding that conversation is when we say Black Latino, people usually have a Black parent who is not from Central or South America or for the Spanish-speaking Caribbean, and then have a parent who is. So that parent who's Latino can be any racial group. And then there's people like myself who use the term Afro-Latino and, Black Puerto Rican interchangeably, because I'm trying to still figure that out for myself. But the way that we currently hear people use Afro-Latino is primarily people who have Black Latino parents who are from Central South America, Spanish-speaking Caribbean, who are racially Black, and also have that cultural element as part of their Blackness that folds into their experiences. Yeah. And so the white supremacy looks the same. It is what has divided us. It is what has offered us an opportunity to dehumanize each other again and again. And I'm just not committed to that labor, and I'm in service to that dehumanization. So a lot of the conversations that are happening right now, I believe, they don't necessarily invite my experience into the conversation, which I'm fine with, because other people need to be talked about. It's not always about me or my experience. And as a Leo, I say that with pride. It's not about me. And it's a very complicated situation to be in, because we're also talking about my parents' experiences and the historical trauma of white supremacy and erasure of Blackness being something that was fed to me every day, consistently and constantly. And so it's a everyday decision to violate that and challenge my upbringing.
Yeah.
So
I
yeah,
love
that's
that.
a little bit of,
yeah. No, I love that. And I always, it's funny because, this is slowly getting into the conversation around colorism and I think about it because, I'm always intrigued by light-skinned folks, like the nebulousness of their identities and, what are you and all that stuff, because that's not something I would even say I've never even had, I've said before, I've never even had the quote unquote privilege to have someone ask me, what are you? It's always assumed, oh, well, you just this. And it's like, well, damn, I could have been from Jamaica. I could have been from the Dominican Republic. I could have been all that. Y'all, and everybody's like, no, you just Negro. And it's like, but there's layers to it. And there's all these different things that just to me are really fascinating. And so I appreciate you sharing all of that, because it's still, there's also part of me that's like, well, shit, I ain't got to figure it all out. There's also the privilege of not having to do any of these questions. So I just let folks have their moments. But then I also think politically, I'm not sure if you're familiar. Are you familiar with Desus and Mero? Those are my folks. I love them so much. So I think about Mero, who's Dominican, who often talks about, like, he's black. And the thing that I loved was, like, he was like, when the cops get here, they not asking me if I'm from Dominican Republic or if I'm from here or from there. They're like, you black. They calling me the N-word just like everybody else. And so I think about that too. But I'm also one of those people that's like, if you are not, for lack of a better term, visibly black, I just don't feel like it's my place to tell you what you need to claim. Even though for me, I'm like, all y'all black to me. But if you decide you want to claim it or you don't, that's on you, and if you do claim it, shouts out. So
exactly. And, and I think it takes a lot to come to that decision of, like, I'm going to betray my heritage and my upbringing and challenge that and violate it and essentially become a race traitor. Because that's really what it is. We use that term for racially white people who refuse to be in service to white supremacy, but it also applies to people who are Latino, because Latino is not a racial group. You can be of any racial group. Any racial group. So, it's also the complicated ways that the United States creates a racial hierarchy, which is trash.
Right. Which is a whole other episode, but it's an important one. Absolutely. Yeah. So then, Bianca, tell folks, because I know at this point there may be a little, we're gonna hold space for them. I'm gonna say clueless, but I don't mean it with shade. I don't mean to be mean. But there are a few folks who are probably listening who are probably like, what the hell does any of this have to do with sex ed? So tell them, like, what does any of this have to do with sexuality, sex ed? So share from your perspective what you feel like, how you feel like this all relates to sex ed, and even what happens in the classroom when folks are trying to learn basic things like contraceptives or, relationships or sexual orientation, et cetera, and so forth.
Yeah. So, colorism is the homie of white supremacy. Like, they hang out,
actual facts.
They gossip together, they have drinks. And so, when I walk into a classroom, the students read my body. They racialize me. They see how I'm presenting my gender, my expression, the way I adorn and decor my body. And so I'm literally being consumed by the people in the classroom.
Actual facts.
And so I'm not just talking about young people, because they do that, of course, but I'm also talking about adults who do that too. And so it is the way that we have been socialized to try to place people into certain categories so that we can figure out how to treat them, essentially. And, for me, what that has looked like is really interesting, because even if I didn't, there was a while where in my teens, I didn't claim Blackness because I didn't know that it was something that I could claim until I started to realize I'm being treated just like my other homies here. And, here's the lie. Because it was white people who helped me understand, oh, you don't belong here. You are not who you are here. We need to listen to you. I get to interrupt you. I get to make you feel unsafe. These are all the things that I have that you don't. Right. And I'm going to flex them as often as I can in the classroom or elsewhere. And so that really showed up for me, and it still does, again and again and again. And as a young person, I didn't know what was happening. I didn't have the language for it. Even though I had lighter skinned Black people in my life, I had biracial Black people in my life, I had a white parent and a Black parent. and they weren't talking about it either, right? So we're in a different time, I think, for a lot of people to have these larger conversations. We were still talking about passing and what passing meant for some people in our families and in our communities. And today we have a more nuanced understanding of what that looks like and how it was enacted and the lived reality of it. But also what showed up specifically for me, as I mentioned earlier, is this idea of lighter skin and a certain aesthetic, which I inherently embody because of my genetics, was exalted in my community. And I'm definitely a child of 90s hip hop. I dressed like TLC and Salt and Pepper, and, all like that was a part of my whole life. And, that really played a role in affirming, one, my identity and my experiences, to see myself represented. It was powerful to see that representation, but it also wasn't power that I got, right? I didn't understand what to do with that. And so what that means is, when I was 15, 16, I had a lot of older men in their 30s and 40s hitting on me, inviting me to dinner, or buying me something after school, buying me sneakers. Like, these were things that I was offered to be a companion to adult men, right? And so I think it's important to say that out loud because, 16-year-old, 15-year-old Bianca didn't see it as a problem. She didn't see it as something that would harm her. And I want to honor that audacity and that sense of security and safety, or sense of self. But also today, I want to hold the reality that it was an incredibly violent, traumatic experience to be hypersexualized, to be seen as, listen, I was 5'10" by the time I was 15, so to be, and a size 14, so it I was adultified, as,
Same.
say a lot in the way we do. And that is at the heart of a lot of the loss of freedom, of being a child, of being curious, the loss of safety, the lack of trusted adults who cared about me, and how they showed up in my life. And because of that, to this day, I'm still shocked that, like, I didn't experience a teen pregnancy. And I believe that was my ancestors being like, no, enough of us have. You are not the one that needs to have that experience right now. Because I made a lot of bad choices, Tracy. I made a whole, like,
listen. Yeah.
So we talk about colorism. It's so important to, like, the existence of so many of us, because it's crafted who we're told we can become and where we're told we belong. And for many lighter skinned people, that has often been the argument, oh, well, I'm not Black enough, and, well, I get harmed too. Okay, girl. And your commentary isn't what's needed right now. Everybody knows that. And what's needed now is a strategic use of that power that you have, which you have, which you're just sitting on. And that, to me, that's not who I want to be. And so when it comes to, like, that kind of accountability, I remember, the 5 years when my mom died, like literally a week later, we were at a cabin in the woods somewhere in Pennsylvania. I just released the Real Deal about love and solidarity curriculum, and it came with a video. And we watched that video, we did some activities, and afterwards you were like, Bianca, we gotta talk about colorism. And I remember being, like, so numb just with grief, but also being like, Tracy's my homie, I could do it, we can have this conversation. Of course she's right. Yes, we needed a content warning. I clearly wasn't, thinking about this in this moment. And, it really was an important experience, not just for me to have, but also for our relationship. I think for me to really say, you're right, to not reject what you had to share, but to also be held accountable. And, that was the start of us being like, we could totally do.
We can do something together.
Something.
So, we got to break that down, though, for folks. Because they're like, wait, a cabin in the woods? What happened? Like, what was going on? There's so many layers to what you brought up. The first thing that popped up in my head is the colorist codification of fetishization that goes on of Black femmes, because I was thinking of you, how you told your story, and I was thinking, like, there's very few, especially not cis Black femmes that I know of, who haven't at some point been approached by an older, mostly masculine presenting person for sexual something in the course of their prepubescent, pubescent, adolescent years. And the story I tell is, I was 12 years old. But it's so ironic to me because never once was I ever approached for something akin to a relationship. It was always, what that thing do, what that mouth do, can I do this, it's always some type of flippant sexual favor. And I'm like, it's amazing to me that even in the objectification, there's still an expectation of what you get access to. I told the story, and I want to be clear, I've never been someone who was raised to hate her skin color. Like, I never saw my own skin color as bad. I was just very clear that I wasn't the chosen one, and that was just what it was. But I think as a result of that, a lot of experiences I had just got suppressed back in my memory. As a matter of fact, a couple of weeks ago, a person I went to high school with, lighter skin, masculine person, passed away from COVID. And once that announcement came out on Facebook, I was triggered by the memory of him soliciting me for sex in high school, even though he had a huge crush on my lighter skinned best friend. And when I asked, well, why didn't you ask her for sex? Why you hit me up? Ask her for sex. His response was, well, I can't do that. She's an angel. And it was this clear expectation of what I was supposed to be doing and what I had the capacity to do versus her. And so it's just, that is just something that's sitting with me. But then, so then to fast forward to that cabin in the woods where you're showing this video, which, I mean, that video, I had to do some purging, right, y'all? So basically it's this video, and it was, youth developed. So bless that baby's heart who decided this was the video they wanted told, but it just has a really negative portrayal of dark-skinned Black people. It was one of those things where it was like, wow, I didn't even know that I'm sitting with this. I did not know that this would affect me in this way, because that's just not my lens. That's just not how I intentionally go about the world looking for colorism. But here it is right in my face that this skin color means you have access to this, and it actually hurts you more than you realize. So I think that struck me, but then to be able to bring it up and to say, yeah, this was violence. And I will say that we did that in front of a bunch of other white people. Whew, that was intense on multiple levels. But sometimes that's the work, right? And I think this is a great way to get into the discussion of accountability. But sometimes that's what it is. There is no perfect place to be able to acknowledge, like, yeah, this thing happened and there's something to be checked about in this moment. And, sometimes there is no fancy, well, let's go and have this space where, we can say, sometimes you got to just get called out and you got to deal with it in that moment. And I think that's one of the things I appreciated about you, that you were like, let's do it. And, we were able to go there because I think a lot of people aren't ready for that at all. And I want to, so we're going to get to accountability, but I do want to get to my regular interview questions. So I want to ask you, what do you feel like, because I have a few that in my own head, but I want to hear your answers. What do you feel like is your sex ed superpower?
A sex ed superpower. I think, so there's a couple of things. I think I take a lot of pride in taking complicated ideas and making them more accessible with language that people can understand.
Yes.
And I say that as someone who went through a PhD program and a master's program and all this other stuff. And, I was pushed out of my first PhD program because I was told my language was too accessible, that I needed to talk to the community of scholars that I was trying to be a part of.
What the fuck is
and I was just like, whatever, like, what are you talking about? Right. But so language access has always been important to me. And I strive really hard to keep the work that I do at a particular reading level so that it is accessible to all parents, all people. Because listen, we live in a country that has 70% literacy rate, which is ridiculous for such a quote unquote first world country. And so I feel like that's one of my superpowers. I really also believe that, not being afraid of conflict is really...
That was the one I was going to pick for you. Bianca going to get some shit popping if nobody else will.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and I think, the not being afraid of conflict, that fucks people, that fucks white people
it
up,
does,
especially.
Yeah.
because they really think, first of all, they can come for me and that I'm allow it in the way that they think they can. But also that they expect an apology almost sometimes from me. And I'm not apologizing for a goddamn thing, especially to no white people, when I know that there's no reason to apologize.
Yeah.
And so instead what I do is I thank people for their generosity and for, caring for me and our community in such a powerful way that they voiced this, and remind them that this is a part of what it means to be a messy human being, and to also create a culture of consent.
Right.
Because if we're not able to talk about the things we don't like, how are we going to be able to talk about the things that we do like, or do want to have in our lives?
Yeah.
And so that to me is just an essential part of accountability in the way that I want to move in the world. But it's also very, it's isolating because a lot of people don't like conflict at all. And conflict, discomfort, those are sites for unlearning and for producing new knowledge. Yeah. And so I really revel in that chaos.
Yeah. Well, it's the cognitive dissonance where the issue is, right? Like we are so comfortable and so willing to like live in delusion that we have to have conflict in order to get free, because that's the only thing that's going to make us uncomfortable enough to push past the delusions that we hang on to about sex, about race, about, what's normal in the world and all of these things. And so it's so funny because sometimes I'm with myself. I'm telling you, like, I'm your intellectual baby in a lot of ways, because I'm like, I didn't used to be this confrontational until I got here, and I was like, oh, is this what we doing? Okay. Like, I remember when the switch turned off in my own head, where I was like, you know what, there's no way I can show up. I'll say to sex ed, there's no way I can show up to this field without people seeing me as a conflict. So I might as well show all the way the fuck up. And that changed everything. But what I realized is, there's nothing wrong with conflict unless you make it wrong, right? And some of the things I think about with this too, like I think about how intention. So I'm going to say something. I'm going to try to make sure I'm clear in a way so I can be clear that I'm not knocking the rule, the idea of intention being more important than, or being less important than impact. I think where that backfires is that people get so much on eggshells because they're so concerned about impact. And I think it goes the opposite way. So marginalized folks get so eggshelly about, where it's like, that did not mean what you think it meant. The intention versus impact doesn't mean I'm not going to hurt your feelings sometimes, or I'm not going to say something where you're like, like, what it means is that it is an opportunity for me to be held accountable and for me to step up. Like, and I think people are so, that's what I want to say. Even folks with privilege, I think they are so concerned, so sad, and so like fearful of impact that they don't, like, their intentions completely go false, where they're not genuine. And then they're still causing impact issues because they're not moving with intention. Or their intention is so focused on their own selves versus how can I be of support? How can I be of service? The intention is, how can I not hurt your feelings? Which, that's not the point, right?
Right. Like, our feelings are going to be what they are regardless. It doesn't make you a bad person because someone was hurt because you said something, or it was the wrong, or whatever. It's the changed behavior that people want. People want that harm to stop.
That's the part.
And so if you don't learn from it, that's the part where that's the problem.
Right.
And I think, for me, I try to remind people that, like, as human beings, we can witness harm, we can experience harm, and we can cause harm.
Yeah.
Because how complicated we are as human beings. We are not cyborgs yet. We're not robots yet.
We're not omniscient. We don't know all the rules. We don't know everything.
And that's okay. We shouldn't know everything. Right. Like, there's so much more room to learn. And, those are the places where, for me, I love telling people, I got a 6-year-old in my life who's one of my mentors right now, and those are the ways that I'm choosing to, like, show up and find other mentors for me, because listen, it's not going to be these 50-something-year-olds in our field who want to pay attention to us.
Mm-hmm.
They too are trifling
Mm-hmm.
and are refusing to grow and evolve.
And that's the difference. Like, because the reality is that we're all trifling, but it's a difference when you're trifling. You know you're trifling, and you're actually trying to work through it, and you're unapologetically trifling, and you're actually looking to the younger generation to get accolades and kudos for shit you haven't actually done and you don't actually deserve.
Right? That's not how it works. Like, that's also not collaboration,
right?
And it's not sustainable, right? Like, at the end of the day, I'm also all about sustainability. What can we do that will create change that's long lasting,
yes,
and also allow for change to evolve throughout the process?
Yes.
And that requires succession planning. That requires getting out of the way. That requires leaving a job or a position. And I've done that multiple times, not always in the most accountable way, but also in the way that was most accountable to me and my spirit and what I needed.
Right.
And really, that's the first person. Like, so as a Leo, I'm gonna tell y'all, like, only you can take care of yourself. And, it's also a gift that you offer to the people who love you when you take care of yourself.
Yes.
It helps that relationship evolve. And it also offers you the opportunity to be vulnerable and find that strength in the vulnerability and ask for help.
Yeah.
Because when I asked for help and you showed up, like, that was a gift I was able to give you and that you were able to give me. So it helped, maintain our reciprocal relationship.
Yeah.
That oftentimes, listen, a lot of Black femmes don't have relationships that are rooted in reciprocity. We have relationships that are rooted in extraction. And that is not sustainable.
Yeah.
And we can probably think of several people in our lives who had those kinds of relationships. Yeah. And they would tell us they learned that a little too late. Yeah. And so I think it's really important for me to receive accountability, to receive a call out, a call in as a radical form of love. Yeah. Because that's the choice that I make to receive it in that way. And it's not a common response. And I think it really fucks a lot of white people up because they don't know what to do with someone who's like, thank you for saying that hard stuff, that correct around this legislation or whatever it is. And it also is a modeling of what's possible in our communities that we don't see enough of. Right. And I definitely am starting to think about, what are the ways that, I want people to feel seen and heard when they're in a space with me. And my priority, look, I'm a Black femme supremacist. I will say
I remember that from our first conversation. You saying that to me, and I was like, wait a minute. I gotta sit with this for a minute because I don't know that I've ever thought about it. So. Yeah.
And that changes your perspective and your lens when you center the people in the community that you're intentionally building relationships with. Yeah. And that's something that I think a lot of white and lighter skinned people do not understand. And oftentimes when I teach them, like, but Bianca, how can I reach Black community? How can I reach Asian Americans and blah blah? And I'm like, well, do you know where they are? Do you know where they work? Do you know where they eat? Do you know where they're?
Have you asked yourself why are you trying to reach them? Right. Do you know that they want you reaching them? Do you know, exactly. Are you certain that they want you in their neighborhoods?
Right. And also, like, let's be real. A lot of white people in our field think it's a compliment to invite you or me or other Black people to teach something at their organization. Right. They're seriously underpaid what we're worth. And I'm always like, you ain't never come to anything I ever did.
Right.
Why do you think I should leave my community and my space rooted in liberation and collective access,
right?
To go to your rinky-dink, whatever it is, right, and be exposed to a variety of white supremacist thinking that is just going to be a container for maintaining that environment.
And not just exposed, inundated, like soaked, pushed, forced head down into the toilet of your policies and practices and ways of thinking and ways of being. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Oh my goodness. Okay, so I'm going to rephrase my next question a little bit differently, thinking positionality. And I love how you call on folks. And I do this with my classes too, to think about their identity from a politicized perspective. So from a politicized perspective, I'm going to shift gears and have you talk a little bit about intersectionality, which I know you have an amazing course. I had the chance to see what you did with the group in, I think it was Massachusetts, somewhere up there with the white folks.
New England.
Right, New England, right. Somewhere up there with the white folks. But it was amazing to me. Tell me what you feel like folks in our field get wrong when it comes to teaching about intersectionality and why.
Yeah, so I think people get wrong a lot of things. The first thing is that it's only about multiple identities, and it's not. Intersectionality is a theory of power and oppression. And understanding that we all are complicated and have layered identities and experiences is just the beginning. That's like the introductory sentence, y'all.
Right.
Like, that's not the whole thing.
Right.
There's a whole theoretical concept that follows after that.
Right.
So people then just stop there. People then don't engage with power. They don't engage with systems. They also think that the systems are only outside of us. They're over there, like the healthcare system, the education system. And they don't ever realize that, like, the systems in our bodies are also systems that we need to figure out. And so I know that there's going to be a question about this coming up, but like, as someone who has a compromised immune system and therefore is considered and is disabled, my relationship with my immune system and other people in the world really shifted when the pandemic hit. And you were the last person that I ever saw, before the pandemic. You came for a visit, and I remember it like it was yesterday, because that's when we started hearing stories coming from parts of Asia, here in California. And my relationship with my immune system is a conversation that we don't always have when it comes to intersectionality, or the relationships that we have with our digestive systems, and the ways that a lot of queer and trans young people oftentimes report having gastrointestinal problems. And that's deeply rooted to the stressors, the trauma of not being accepted or affirmed, or having people find support around. And that continues for a lot of adults. We now call it something like a gluten allergy or irritable bowel syndrome or whatever it is, but it also is the way that our body is somatically and viscerally responding to other things too.
Absolutely.
So I think people forget that there's systems in our bodies that we also need to figure out and talk about. And then look, people mess up the language all the time, Tracy. I got a whole slide in my class where I'm like, let's just talk about grammar, y'all. Let's just talk about grammar.
Right.
Intersectionality is a noun. It's capitalized,
Right.
And a lot of people will misuse the language and say the intersectionality of this.
Right.
No. You want to look at this thing through an intersectional lens.
Right.
So the adjective of intersection,
right.
How do you take intersectionality, the noun, and turn it into an adjective? Well, that's how you do it, intersectional lens or framework. And those are the pieces that really burn my biscuits, to be quite honest. And then also people thinking that they can say, oh, the intersection of BDSM and kink and healing, and think that the term intersection means anything about intersectionality. No, homies. That is a noun in its own right. That existed for forever.
Right.
I think finally, people don't recognize that Kimberly Crenshaw is not the only citation for intersectionality. That there are plenty of Black and Indigenous people in the Americas who have done intersectional work, but weren't calling it that. There are plenty of examples of that throughout history. And it's also really important to understand that Kimberly Crenshaw came from a legal perspective. And I don't have a legal perspective necessarily. I have a social science one, a humanities one. And there was conversations happening in the humanities and social sciences at the same time. So, Patricia Hill Collins calls it the matrix of domination in Black feminist thought. So here are the ways that how can we put Crenshaw and Collins in conversation in their early work, and also acknowledge that this is work that has been done by Black women, by Indigenous women for centuries, and that it's not new. It's just a new language. Those are some of the things I think we get wrong.
I appreciate you raising that point. I mean, I'm definitely a person that's like cite Black women, so I've always been big on being like, okay, but Kimberly, okay, but Patricia. But I do appreciate what you're saying, because I think about this a lot too when I think of now just a lot of the debates that I feel like are also, they've had to be reactive to white supremacy. The debates around intellectual property and this idea of like, you've got to put a name on something, because I think what often happens is younger scholars of color come out with something and they have to put a name on it and claim to it, so white supremacy doesn't take it, even though when you really look at it, what they came up with isn't new either. And it's kind of like they just happen to be the one talking about it at this time. So it's like this real weird, ugly kind of thing where it's like, I sit in, but my Libra of self allows me to sit in both sides, to sit in both camps, to be like, that ain't new, but I get why you put your label on it. I get it.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah, I'm all about citation too. I believe citation is such a beautiful way to invite people in to their own learning, to show up for learning. And citation is just, I stopped citing white people. Let me just say that up front. I stopped citing white people, and I'm like, I'm not going to talk about Daniel Patrick Moynihan and the case of the Negro family. I'm going to cite these other 3 Black women who have already debunked all this shit. Right. And if you want to go and read the original papers, that's on you. You can find it out through these 3 Black women.
Right.
And that, to me, is also a form of love. And it's a form of editing. That's also a form of love.
Yeah.
Because look, white people will not cite us. They will take our work and they will use our work and never cite us.
And that's another, what I love to, like, I believe, when I think of what you said about accessibility, I am the same way. And I, like, at the same time, I recognize that the academy is elitist bullshit. I also recognize that the academy doesn't belong to white people. So I'm actively like, how can we take these tools and use it for regular folks too? So I'm big on citing, for example, citing Kashawn Thompson as the originator of Black Girl Magic. I'm down for citing, just citing whoever, right? Like, who is outside of the academy, and recognizing this is their intellectual labor. Hot Girl Summer, giving Megan her flowers, and like recognizing like knowledge creation is in our communities all the time. And the only difference is that a lot of us aren't privy to the tools and the machinations of citing things, but we still have the right. And because we have the skill, and in many cases, I feel like we're the newer we're creating the new shit anyway. Like, y'all not doing nothing but like, I'm like, y'all really just, what's the word? Incest. It's incest, intellectual incest. Y'all just pulling off y'all shit. We the ones with the new. We the ones with the new. Like with the, to this day, the article that came out about youth in Baltimore using yo as a gender neutral pronoun. I'm like, that's the shit. That's that shit. Nobody's gonna get him that credit, but that's the credit that where it needs to go. While y'all talking about they on some they on the next level shit. Yeah. Right. So that's why I'm always like, let's cite. But I also acknowledge, I hear what you're saying about the historical realities of just all these folks that have been, and I recognize, to me, that sometimes naming and claiming helps rectify that history, because if we don't put our name on it, somebody else will. And it's like, no, hopefully, I don't know Kimberly Crenshaw, but I would hope that she's aware that she stands on shoulders, right? And she recognizes that, yes, my name is on this, but it's not just mine. Like, like my theory, I'm very clear that I pulled from, Joy DeGruy Leary. I'm clear that I pulled on E. Patrick Johnson. Matter of fact, I emailed him and was like, yo, can I get you to write an endorsement for my book? I'm like, I'm very clear. I wasn't the first person who talked about this. Even racialized sexuality, that goes to Abdul Jam Muhammad. Maybe this is my bee in my bonnet, I think our field doesn't do enough. Well, I think academics, period, don't do enough to figure out, am I the first person who said this? Am I the first person who used this term? Or do I just say something quick on my IG live and I'm like, I made that up? When it's like, did you? If you did your work, if you did your research, you would see that maybe you weren't. Right. And so I see, again, that's a messy response to what you said, but I feel like it's, it's recognizing I see all the sides.
Yeah. And I think we're part of that generation that is really doing a different type of justice work, where, I think a lot about my homie, Moya Bailey.
Yes.
Who coined the term misogynoir. That is the kind of citation and attribution that a person should have when they create something new.
Yes.
Right. And that, we've seen that manifest and shift and change. And Moya has steadily remained the citation that people offer that too.
Yeah.
Even after, she left the crunk feminists, like, it stayed with her and it wasn't appropriated from her. And I think those are really, really important reminders that it is possible. And she has a book coming out titled Misogynoir.
Yes.
And that is, that to me is the beauty of what's possible. And that citation really, it is a form of radical love, because for us to sit here and be like, look, Combahee River Collective,
yes,
Harriet Tubman, who were those Quaker people that helped Harriet Tubman, get all those people out. The fact that we don't know those individuals' names, that to me is a form of violence that white supremacy wants to erase.
Yes.
Because white people know those people's names.
Yes. Even something like, I think of Carter G. Woodson. Because before, and I appreciate the conversation you and I had that helped me think about decolonization with regard to land. But even before that, he was the first person I ever read who talked about mental colonization and was like talking about how that affects them. And I was so now to have the whole piece around decolonization and this whole thing of decolonizing sexuality, it's like, okay, so what are we talking? Like, what's the basis? What are y'all really? Do you know what you are really talking about? Somebody invited me to come on a conversation, and I did it. But then I was like, I honestly, I don't know that I ever think about. Like, somebody asked, well, what do you do to decolonize? And I'm like, bitch, I live. I don't know. Like, what do you mean? I show up. That's what the fuck I do, right? Like, I be myself. I was born decolonized because I wasn't allowed to be part of the colony. So, so it's all really fascinating to me. Yeah. So tell me, you were right. We're going to get into this topic. Tell me now, especially with what you did with Crip Camp and things like that. Tell me how you transitioned from the works that you started with into getting into disability justice and how that shows up in your work today.
Yeah, so it really is about intentional relationships. And, one of my homegirls, Stacey Park Milburn, we have known each other since 2007, maybe. I can't even remember. Maybe earlier. She is a Korean American who grew up in North Carolina, and we met when I was living in New York City. And she's disabled. She has particular disability, and we just became homegirls online. We talked a lot about sexuality, being racialized. We talked about challenges in our lives, and that was the first relationship that I intentionally built with a physically disabled person that I knew was physically disabled. My mother also was the one person at her job in the 80s that took my sister and I to visit her dying boss, who was a gay man dying of AIDS complications. And I remember her bringing us into his room and being like, you can touch his hand, and him just crying. And he's like, thank you so much for bringing the kids. And I didn't realize like what that meant for him in the moment of people just being afraid to bring him food. But the fact that my mother was like, fuck this shit. My children are going to see you. They know you. They're going to say goodbye. And so I had, there were radical things that my parents did. They weren't rooted in race, but they were rooted in other things like disability and community in a particular way. And so, having Stacey in my life really challenged me to push and think about accessibility in a different way. And so she is one of the 6 originators of a disability justice framework that was created with several other people, all who are queer, trans, people of color primarily, who also introduced this framework to the public. And so being able to have a relationship with her that was sustainable and long lasting. When I moved to California, she had already moved here as well and was living in the Bay Area. And so she was like one of 2 friends that I had here when I moved here. And so we maintained that friendship, and she unfortunately died in May of last year, which was devastating. And prior to her death, she received the position of what they call impact producer for the film Crip Camp. And impact producers it's a Hollywood title. It basically is people who hold and manage all of the moving parts around marketing, but also the impact that the film can have in the community that they target. And so as I say this, you can probably think about all the movies that don't have an impact campaign or impact team because they haven't been elevated in the same way.
They weren't created for that purpose.
Exactly. And so Stacey Park Milburn and Andrea Levant were both hired as the impact producers. Andrea is a Black disabled woman. And she was also a friend that I had known for about 1.5 years, and we had like a budding friendship and colleagueship. And it was when you were here that Stacey was like, can you get on the call real quick? And I was like, it's 9:00, yo.
Right.
And, I forgot. I think I left your visit to have the call with her and then came back, and then I think you left.
Yeah, no, I remember that. I do remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so she basically, her and Andrea got on the line and they were like, we just got this job and we want to write a curriculum rooted in disability justice. And
wait. I'm having my mind is melting. Cause I just kind of was like, oh yeah, I remember that. But it's only in this moment that I realized that's what that call was for. Oh my gosh. Because I remember you were like, yeah, I got this thing with Netflix. And I was like, okay, bitch, you doing Netflix. Okay, do it. But oh my gosh, to see that that's
Yeah.
what that was for.
Yeah, yeah. And and it is amazing because it was rooted in our friendship. Stacey and Andrea, they trusted me. They knew the work that I did. They had seen the work that I did.
Yeah.
And they also brought in my homegirl, Aisha Turman, who's a
Yes.
Black woman that lives in New York City,
Shouts out to
creator
the Black
and
Girl
ED of the Black
Project.
Project. And so both of us were on the call, and bless Aisha's heart, it was midnight in New York City time. Um, and they were like, "Will y'all do it?" Because they have hired, they being the people before us, hired an education team. They didn't tell us who it was, but they were like, "It's the same level as like Scholastic, very high, paying, very well known." And we asked them some basic questions like, what do you think ableism is? And what do you think some challenges are for disabled youth? And they didn't have any answers. They were like, it's hard for them.
Right.
They were like, oh, you can't write this curriculum.
At all.
So it was really my relationships with them and me showing up for our relationship, and also maybe a little bit of them pimping out our relationships to be like, we got to get you on a call right now. And can you write the scope of work in the next 6 hours? And I didn't know what was going to happen. I also didn't know what was possible. And so, it was from that relationship that I also was able to build other relationships with more disabled people. And so when I got my diagnosis of my disability 5 years ago, and it happened right when my mom died, and I didn't know what was happening, but I had inherited her immune system and the challenges that show up with it. And I got the diagnosis, and it wasn't devastating, because I had so many disabled people in my life who were living full, amazing, beautiful lives.
Right. Yeah.
And the shame that I think happens for a lot of non-disabled people who then acquire a disability later on, that shame didn't always exist for me. And I've been able to stop the negative self-talk and say things to myself like, this is a gift that your mother offers. I'm not a religious person, but spiritually I can say I am created in a divine light. And I mirror what my ancestors experienced and look like. Yeah. So that was what really helped me with a compromised immune system, where I wasn't going to get better quickly. I'm never going to be healthy again in my life. And the complicated relationship with like the medical industrial complex. So those were pieces that really helped me shape the curricula that I do, being exposed early on to some of the thoughts of what does a disability justice model look like? What are the principles of disability justice? And it really is such a beautiful and life-saving framework that welcomes us all in, that says we are all whole, none of us are broken, that recognizes interdependence as a gift and as a requirement to be a human being on the planet, and really encourages us to dream of a world where everybody has their needs met.
Yeah.
Can you imagine?
No, I can't. And that's why I still got growing to do. I cannot imagine it. But I love the notion. I love the notion.
Yeah. Yeah. Really beautiful.
Yeah. And so my next question is one of my regular questions, but I'm going to shift it again, thinking about practitioners, like, and especially folks that work in or desire to work in Black communities. For the person who's like, Bianca, you're amazing. I love everything you said. I have no idea how to begin in doing this work. What would be some kind of initial suggestions, thoughts, things that you give for them to begin to do?
Yeah, I would say, get online, make sure that you have access to online communities, because that's where a lot of us are at, and that's where a lot of us are thriving. I would also welcome people to come to Black Sweat. Tracy's going to come and speak in a few months.
Facts.
Because Black Sweat was created really for non-Black people to have an opportunity to meet us, to learn from us, to build with us, to then have our contact information to then reach out and be like, hey, can I put you on my referral list? Or, hey, can I do like 5 hours of supervision and consulting work with you where you help me figure out blah? Those are all pieces that I think were really intentional for me when I created Black Sweat. And, using the language of a Prince song where he's like, working up a black sweat.
Right.
But also, I'll have you screaming like a white lady when I count to 3. Right, so these are just things that I love about that song.
Right.
But also, like, there's just it's also a professional development opportunity.
Yeah.
Right? Because a lot of people don't know where to start. And a lot of people are scared about building relationships, like, period. That's why we have so many apps, right? Because people are so wanting connection.
Right.
And, what are the ways that we can make that connection a little bit more easier for people to access? And yeah, it comes with a $25 cost because, yes, I'm going to give you one continuing education unit.
Yes.
And also you get to hear this brilliant person speak about their research, their experiences, share with you honestly what's going on. And you get to see the diversity within our communities.
Right.
And you begin to understand that, like, not everybody has the same approach. Not everybody has the same message, because not all Black people are the same.
Right.
And, it's not an endorsement necessarily. It is, but it isn't for me, because I don't want to get in anybody's way of presenting their information in the ways that they want to present it. And is it the way that I would present stuff? Probably not, but it's not my work.
Right.
So really, this is also, for me, an example of strategically using the power that I have as a lighter skinned person who is a continuing education provider, who has this connection in a very white organization that's trying to create a little bit of change that is coming slowly but surely. But that there are opportunities like this all around. And those are things that I think are important for people to know, is that I created Black Sweat not just for Black people. I mean, we show up for each other, period.
Right.
But it was also for everybody to be welcomed into the space and to learn. And that, I think, is an important opportunity for people to really humble themselves and say, let me see how a community that I'm not a part of does it.
Yeah.
Because I've been trained in a very white supremacist way that dehumanizes everybody.
Right.
That sees me as, like, the expert. And so what do I have to learn from these people?
Right.
You have a lot to learn, actually.
Right.
Like how to properly say our name.
How about that? Let's start there.
Right. And, and learning about, like, how to contact us for stuff. And this is also, for me, creating a secondary market for Black sex professionals, where I have a lot of people who are already established coming to talk, and also people who are newly coming into the field and are, like, shocked and honored that I invited them to present.
Yeah.
And, like, you got something important to say.
Yeah.
And these mofos need to hear it. And
it goes back to Black thought leadership, right? And this whole idea of, like, we're the ones who are having new thoughts, but because we're treated as if we're just pawns for white organizations, so we hire you to be the frontline person to make all the folks of color feel good. We don't think about the fact that you actually have unique things to offer. And so, like, it is amazing when somebody asks you, because it's like, oh shit, y'all listening now. Oh shit. So.
Right. And it's like, it's 4 Sundays a month, right? Yes. More or less. And it's, and we're going to do it for, like, I don't know, it's going to end in July because I need a break.
You a good one.
But it started in October to July. That's, I don't know, let's just say it's 10. That's 40 people. That is 40 more Black sex professionals that people did not know before.
And 40 more reasons you can't say, we don't know anybody.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's just like, you can't keep saying the same 3 people's names.
Right.
It's not okay anymore.
Right.
And I demonstrate that too, where I'm like, Tracy Gilbert, you want to read somebody's work who understands the intersectional analysis and is working with Black people? Go look at Tracy Gilbert's dissertation and get on the short list for pre-ordering her book. Right. Those are the ways that, like, I want to demonstrate citation. I don't always have to cite. Everybody knows Patricia Hill Collins. Great. Right. A lot of people know bell hooks. I want to cite other people who are talking about love in a different way too.
And I think it's also important, and this is just me, I think it's important in our profession to cite Black sexologists, because that's the thing that also pisses me off, that people not forget, but they ignore us and then try to pull in somebody from another discipline as if they are more able to speak to this topic than we are. And just don't get me wrong. I think when we're developing new thoughts, we have to draw from those places, but it should never be that a person, especially not a non-Black person, is pulling from outside of our field before at least first consulting the folks who are here. And it's been very humbling in these 2 years that I've been more kind of outside of the academy working, for people to talk about things and to mention people that I'm like, you act like I don't know that person, or to mention people who would then mention me, and to be like, so you, okay, I'll just wait. I'll wait. You have this
Right.
question about this thing and you want me to consult somebody who would tell you to reach out to me. But okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's fine. We could
Yeah.
do that. We could do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that to me is so important because we're here. We are here. And
Yeah. And we've been here. And it's also it's so powerful when someone believes in you and when someone's like,
yes.
here's the microphone. You get it for an hour and we're also gonna pay you.
Yes.
And that's how it's going to work. So tell all your friends, even if they can't show up, to buy a ticket.
Yes.
And that's something that, it's exercising our marketing skills, but it's also telling our community, hey, show up for me.
Yes.
Because this is how I can get paid. This is how I'm dipping my toe in this work.
Yep. And that's another thing I appreciate
important.
about you, where you're like, I could take all of this money and just give you 40 lectures because I'm just that dope. But, you and I feel like we have symmetry in our thinking about that. I was just thinking of not a speech, but like a Facebook rant that I did years before, back when I was like, I'm willing to yell at y'all for free. I don't do that anymore. But where I was talking about Viola Davis, like the first time she won an Emmy or something like that. And it was like she got put on by Shonda Rhimes. Like Shonda saw her in ways that nobody else saw her and was like, I got a role just for you. And it's like, how many of us, especially among the folks of color, how many of us are Violas and how many of us are Shondas? And it's like, you know your role and recognize that sometimes you may be getting an opportunity, but it's not for you. And and having enough faith to say, you know what? This is not my jam, but let me tell you who you can go to, and being willing to pass it on. I think that is so, so important and something that has to me, it represents the collective spirit of the marginalized. I think that's just how we've been able to survive, and that's how we're going to continue to thrive if we keep that and not take on the white supremacist mentality of, if I have it, you can't, and if you get it, I can't have it. It's like, no, we can all win. We can all eat.
Yeah, that scarcity model.
Yes.
It's what? Like, that's not how it works. There's room for all of us.
Right.
And honestly, it's also about like, creating your own table. Like, I don't want to be at the table with the same people
At
all
all.
the time.
It's whack.
Eating all that bland food.
It's whack.
I want to be at the table with people where we got music going on. Like, I love the idea of gumbo yaya, right? Where there's so many different conversations going on.
Yes.
But the same conversation going on.
Yes.
That's what I thrive from, and I also need to rest from it. But like, that's a form of communication that I really appreciate. And for me, I'm like, let's create a table together. Let's create the chairs that we need. Let's, what are the things that we need to do to elongate this table?
Yes.
Because what we're not going to do is push people aside to let you slide in. Like, that's how they do it in the white way. And what we're going to do instead is be like, what kind of chair do you need? Where you want to sit?
Right.
Who you want to be next to? How can we
scoot up?
this?
We're going to share this chair together. We could do it.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
You want to be on the bench?
Right.
Exactly.
Yes. So I'm going to get to my rapid fire questions in a second, but I want to ask you to think through and share with the people what you feel like, as someone sitting with your various identities and just your skill set and all of that, what you feel like your significance, role, or impact is right now to the field of human sexuality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I feel like there's so many things. To pick one would be to, reimagine and unlearn how we dehumanize each other. And so really it's humanization work. Mm-hmm. And I choose to start that work with chattel slavery and the way that indigenous people have been treated in this country specifically. And yeah, that's my choice. And a lot of white people don't understand, like, why are we talking about chattel slavery? Why are you talking about how indigenous people are treated? Well, because this is how we learn to dehumanize each other. Right. And if you don't understand how that's important to your work as a sex therapist, you're not ready to be a sex therapist, right? Like, if you're questioning why are we even watching this, you need to
just the fact that you can't even get your mind to imagine why we might be talking about this.
Right, exactly. That's a big thing.
Right.
And there's plenty of white people that are still coming into the field, plenty of Latinos, plenty of Asian people, non-Black people that still will ask this question, why are we starting here? Aren't we beyond this? Well, you're not talking enough about this community. You know what? Because this is how y'all learned how to treat each other poorly. Right. Was through the ways that these individuals were treated.
Right.
So let's start at the root of the issue and the problem, because y'all aren't ready to talk about colonization and conquest and exploration, but that's really what
those are the main people too. It's like, you can't talk about slavery, but you want to talk about decolonizing. How?
Like, what does that word mean to you then? How are you using it? I want to understand. That's
Baby steps,
wild.
grasshopper. Baby
Yeah,
steps.
exactly. And I feel like my answer would have been different like 10 years ago. It would have been like equity and belonging and I feel like those are all a part of humanizing humanizing each other.
Right.
And I'm not, how do I want to say this? I don't center white people and I don't center whiteness.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that I dehumanize white people. There's a difference. And a lot of people don't understand it. And I still have like non-black people. I have Latinos. They're the most offensive ones who were like, we just keep talking about black people and you're not talking about more multicultural black. Oh, because you think black people aren't Latino. I see you.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not catering to you. And it's also this idea that non-black people are really, they don't know what to do when they see black people loving each other. Mm-hmm. They have no idea what to do with that. Mm-hmm. Like, they're shocked. They're appalled. Sometimes they're scared. Other times they call the police. And other times, I mean, when we really show up for each other, they're in shock.
Yeah.
And they have no idea what to do because it doesn't look like the way that they show up for each other.
Yeah.
Because they are out for blood when it comes to each other. And that's just not how it is with the rest of us all the time. I mean, and that's not all black people. Let's be real. There's some trifling black people, like whatever.
Of course.
And
you can't leave white supremacy unscathed. Like,
no,
you just can't.
None of us. But those people have community, and I don't need to put their name in my mouth to like disrespect them or dehumanize them. I'm gonna leave them alone because I want them to do that to me. So it's reciprocal to not fuck with each other, and that's okay. And I think a lot of people believe that we all got to be friends. No, we don't. We do not need to be friends. You and I are homies, but that's because we chose that for each other. It was a mutual decision. There's other people who want to be my friends, but I'm like, nah, I'm at my friend limit. But also I have high expectations for my homies. Like not just anybody can be my homie. Like, are you serious? I need people who are willing to like really show up in ways that people are not wanting to.
And what I also hear in what you're saying, and not to completely cut you off, but what I hear in what you're saying too is that we don't have to be friends for you to do right by people. And I think that's something too that goes back to what you said about humanization. I think we have this, I don't know if it's a Western thing or white supremacist thing or what, where it's like, I only do right by people that I like. I only do right by people who are, that I perceive to be good. And it's like, from an like ethical, like it should not matter. People should have their, whether you like them or not, you should be able to do right by them. Nobody's saying you got to be your friends. Nobody's saying y'all got to go, go on vacation together or whatever. But it doesn't have to be so that, oh, I don't fuck with you, so I want you to have harm. Nah, like it doesn't have to be that. And so I think that's also an important distinction to make as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I want to say, I will say for the record for listeners now, because I wasn't sure where this conversation was going to go. I just knew I wanted you here and I wanted you part of the conversation. But I want to go on record as saying that I think this is probably the first and maybe only episode that I can honestly say that, okay, white people, this is kind of for you. Right? Like, because I know that y'all are listening. Usually my show is just, just for regular black folks. And I know there's a lot of black sex educators who were like, yes, I got my life off this episode too. But I'm going to say that this is the one where I'm like, okay, white people, y'all can listen. Listen, if you want to cite one, if you want to continue to listen and study and take notes, this is the one to do it. So don't say I never gave y'all nothing and don't ask me for nothing later. Here y'all go.
Yeah.
But we're going to go ahead and wrap it up and give the rapid fire questions because I always want to hear what everyone has to say, and you are no exception. So 5 sentence stems. Just give me the first thing that's on your mind, okay?
Okay, perfect.
All right.
I'm ready.
So first one. Ooh, I'm excited. I'm knocking my mic over. Okay. First sentence stem. Sexiness is
confidence and self-awareness.
Yes, that's it. The sexiest thing about blackness and or black people is
the way that our skin shows up in the sunshine and in the moonlight.
Yes. Pelo negro. Love it. Yes. My go-to for feeling sexy is
a Prince song.
Yeah, come on. What's your favorite? You know, we got to go in now.
Oh my gosh, there's so many. I mean, yeah, there's so many. I love Black Sweat Right Now.
Yes.
I also love like just the silliness of like Starfish and Coffee. You know, there's just, I mean,
yes.
the most beautiful girl in the world.
Oh,
like
yes.
I sing that to myself. It's like self-adoration. You know, there's I feel like there's a Prince song for everything.
That's true. That's true. The first one that popped in my head was Crazy You. I love that one. The earlier ones. And I Want to Be Alone. Ooh, see, look, we can do a whole episode just about Prince. The sex ed of Prince. Okay. Sexual freedom for Black folk is achieved when?
When we heal from the shame that brought us here, unfortunately, in many ways.
Yeah. Absolutely. Can't disagree with that. Okay, last one. When I'm done being on this podcast, I will
drink some water and eat some apple crumble.
Ooh, fun. Yes. It's late here, so I'm done with my sugar intake, but that sounds yummy. Bianca, thank you so much for being here, my love. I'm so happy to have had this conversation with you. I'm so happy that you gave me your time. I know that it is precious and you have a billion other people asking for your attention, so I just appreciate you giving me your attention. Will you please let the folks know where they can find you on the interwebs if they, you know, when they get their coin together to give you your props as you need them?
Absolutely. It's been an honor talking with you and recording it for the archive that we are building and that you're building. Yes. So yeah, I'm accessible on purpose. So people can find me on Instagram as LatiNegrxs Sexologist. It's a long word. You can also find Tracy and she's following me. So you can follow, yes. You can find me there. I'm also on Twitter as Latino Sexuality. Both of my accounts are public, so you can just follow me or read my stuff whenever. If you want the Crip Camp curriculum, you go to cripcamp.com/curriculum. It's in English and Spanish. And yeah, all of those places also have my email address. My first and last name.com is where you can learn a little bit more about me and the work that I do professionally. And if you want to learn more about my trainings, the SARs, the classes that I'm doing, and if you want to get ANTE UP certified, because I have a certification program now, learning or helping people understand justice frameworks and how to incorporate them into our work, that would be anteuppd.com.
Yes, I love that. Love that. And as much of that as possible, I'll put in the show notes. I'm like, I try to cite all the things that I discuss. I'm like, this is going to be the biggest reference page. We mentioned so many things, but it's beautiful. But yeah, that's our show, y'all. I hope you've had a great listen. I wish you all the best. Thank you so much for listening, and we will talk to you next time. Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to T.S.O.B. with Dr. G, produced by Dr. Tracy Q. Gilbert of Tempe, Anaya. To keep up with all things T.S.O.B., follow us on social media at T.S.O.B. the podcast, which you can find on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. For past episodes of the show, visit tsobpodcast.com or subscribe to the show either on YouTube or anywhere else you listen to podcasts. Now, don't forget that you've got homework for this episode. To find the downloadable worksheet for this or any other episode of the show, head on over again to tsobpodcast.com, where you'll find it and any other important information from the show notes. And finally, do you have any questions or thoughts to share? Sound off by email at mailbox@tsobpodcast.com. Again, this was T.S.O.B., the sex ed of Black folk. Thank you for listening. Talk again soon.